Welcome everyone to Sephardic World, and especially welcome to our patrons. And I'm glad we have such a high turnout today. And today we welcome a special speaker, our very own Tom Thielen, who says that he needs no introduction, but I think I will give him a short introduction anyway. I first encountered Ton about 20 years ago in the seeds of time in the very early internet, when he managed to get expelled from a Yahoo group as it then was for saying that they were talking nonsense, which of course they were. And Ton is the former archivist of the Dutch Red Cross, and has made himself the absolute expert on the Portuguese Jewish archives of Amsterdam. Today he is using his wife's computer, so that's why the name is different. Also, I'd like to welcome everybody on YouTube, and to hand over to Ton.
Thank you, David. Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone on YouTube as well. I will be talking about Ets Haim, the famous rabbinical school in Amsterdam, which actually was three things in one. It was a school, it was a library, and it was a charity. I will explain that in my talk. I will give a little bit of history, just enough. I will talk about the purpose and organization of Ets Haim and its archives, and what you can find about its board, its members, its donors, its teachers, its students, its books. My main thesis is that we will be able to reconstruct the membership, we will be able to know the names of all the teachers and almost all of the students, and we will know about the evolution of the library. A little bit of history, I promised. Iberians of Jewish descent started to trickle into Amsterdam somewhere in the middle of the 90s of the 16th century. They acted like they were Catholics at first. There are lots of legends about this period, each with a kernel of truth. While there are earlier signs of Jewish presence, the first report about the Jewish community by Jacob dates from 1608. And the first archival sources from the community itself are even later. But then, in a quick succession of events, the main components of what constitutes a Jewish community were put in place. There were two communities with a board and members, chazans, treasurers, in 1614, and even before that year, like Bet Jacob from 1608 and Neve somewhat later. And then in 1614, the cemetery Bet Haim was bought, and a society to take care of the sick was established. We do not know exactly when. It was Bikur Holim. Dotar, the charity that doled out dowries to young girls and orphan girls, dates from 1615. The first mention of support for Eretz Israel is also from 1616. And all legends and reports put aside, the organization of Jewish communal life came to full bloom in those few years around 1615. In 1618, a third community, Bet Israel, came into being. From the very beginning, the two, and after a few years, three communities worked together and the matter of the cemetery, the school, the care of the sick, and from 1622 they worked together in the care for the poor. And the school was established in 1616 by members of Bet Jacob and Neve. Let me give you a brief look of where you may find Ets Haim. This is a picture of the two synagogues of Amsterdam. To the right is the Ashkenazic Synagogue, built in 1668, 1669. Of course, the Portuguese Jews couldn't stand that and built their own synagogue, even higher than the Ashkenazic one, and it's to the left. And at the foot of the building, you see these outbuildings, and Ets Haim is precisely in the area that's presented here. It's a little bit to the left. To the right is the Chamber of the Mahamat, the board of the Portuguese Jewish community as a whole. In 1808, the situation looks more or less the same. This is the joyous arrival of Louis Napoleon, King of the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, who was a brother of the famous one, Napoleon. Entering Amsterdam, he passed along the synagogue. And I have a more detailed picture where you can see that people were really enthusiastic about Louis Napoleon, climbing the roofs of Ets Haim and waving their hats. This is a plan of the synagogue and its outbuildings. To the left below, that's the point that you were seeing in the pictures I showed just now. Upper right, there are two school rooms, classrooms, which housed the elementary school, where pupils learn to read and write and arithmetic and some basic stuff. To the left below, this large square room, that's the Medras. This is where students of Ets Haim learned their trade. And surrounding it, here and here and here, is the library. That is, it is there nowadays. I don't know where it was in the days of yore. This is what the Medras looked like in 1910. It was not a classical yeshiva, as you probably know, centered around a rabbi or charismatic person or a teacher, with all the students in one room, all receiving the same lessons at the same time. It was more modeled after the Latin school as it existed in the Netherlands. And I believe it existed in Portugal as well. Most of the Portuguese Jews were very cultured, had a good education in Portugal, and it is quite likely, although it has to be studied, that they took their ideals of education from Portugal to Holland. It was based on a curriculum which took into account what children at a young age could learn, enlarging the workload throughout the years, moving from reading prayers to explaining the Talmud. This is what the Medras is right now. It has been restored a few years ago. I believe from 2000 to 2005. And it has fresh colors. The furniture is partly from the main synagogue, where they removed a few of the seatings to move them to the Medras. In the upper left corner, you see one of those panels with the names of members of Ets Haim. There are two rooms, and you are looking at the entrance of the second room. They have, of course, books, desks, tables, and upstairs there were even more books. And the second room, you are looking at the entrance of that. And there's another room where you can borrow the books. By the way, you can still go there yourself, ask for books, and study them there. You just have to make an appointment so that the one curator that's there is prepared for your visit. This large window on the roof lets in enough light for reading. This was important in days before electricity was invented. And you see it in more libraries around the world. Large windows on top of the roof. If there wasn't enough room, there were these Flemish chandeliers, which are also in the main building of the synagogue. The nice thing about this is that it reflects what is happening beneath. And you might just see me in the middle of this round bowl taking the picture that is presented here. I talked about the board of Ets Haim. In the 17th and 18th century, and partly in the 19th century, the board was elected in a joint session of the board of Ets Haim and the Mahamat of the community. And this was a session that took place every year. So the board was renewed every year. Since the members of the Mahamat and Ets Haim were recruited from the same influential and illustrious families, we can assume that the visions of the board of Ets Haim and of the Mahamat on education were essentially the same. And the members of the board of Ets Haim have been published in a commemorative publication now 100 years old. And the board as it is presented here is probably the last one, probably from 1941 when the school closed. We all know why. So this was the last board of Ets Haim. Let me take you to the archives. The archives of Ets Haim are kept in the municipal archives of Amsterdam, and they are part of the archives of the Portuguese Israelite community of Amsterdam. And you may find them if you look down under the caption Gedeponeerde archieven, deposed or deposited archives. I don't know the exact term. And the most important registers beside those of Ets Haim itself, are from the community at large. And these are, for instance, Escamot A, B, and C. which run from 1640 to 1728. They are the all important resolution books of the Mahamat. And they have the appointments of the head of the school, the Ross, and the teachers, Rubissim, and other information can also be found in the rest of these vast archives of the Portuguese community. Last time I looked, they had 150,000 scans online. And that's still only part of it. This is the part about gedeponeerde archieven, and the most important resource for this period is Thermos, de Talmud Torah et de Ets Haim. And these are the resolutions of Talmud Torah. They run from 1616 to 1728. As the term resolution says, here are to be found resolutions, decisions, but not discussion. And this particular book is the oldest Thermos book. And it's called Thermos de Talmud Torah et Ets Haim because originally there was a school, but it was called Talmud Torah. I changed its name, and I'll get to that. The next registers that are of importance are the resolutions. Since 1816, many books of Ets Haim. I was searching for the English term. And they went from 1637 to 1876. And the ones after that are still with the community. At the very beginning of Talmud Torah, later Ets Haim, is a founding document signed by some 170 male members of the two existing Portuguese communities at the time, Bet Jacob and Neve Shalom. And my feeling is that these 170 male members were the complete membership of the two communities. If you multiply, and this is arbitrary, the number of 170 with 4, you get an approximate number of Portuguese Jewish people living in Amsterdam at the time, which aligns very fine with other reports about the growth of this community. In this book, where this list is to be found, there are also some members of this Talmud Torah, but those stop in 1622, and there were no more than 80 members of this Talmud Torah, and presumably they also gave money. New members of Ets Haim were noted in Thermos A of Ets Haim. And you have an example of such a list here. Each year there was a new list, and on top of the list there was always the name of the treasurer, in this case Samuel de Elissa Abrabano, and to the left are the men, to the right are the women. because although this is also named the Brotherhood, sisters could also join the community, the charity Ets Haim. There's another source for members of Ets Haim, and those are the Pautas dos Irmãos da Irmandade de Talmud Torah e Ets Haim. And these are panels. I mentioned them before, and they are in the Wintersnoge, which used to be the Midras, and they are hanging on the walls. I imagine that students, if they looked up from the books, they could see the names of those who financed their studies. A moment to be thankful, a moment for commemoration, and maybe sometimes a burden. Here, the years in front of the members are the years of entrance into the charity Ets Haim. And these panels were installed from 1728. There's also a register with all the members, the Memoria dos Senhores, que presente são irmãos da Irmandade, de TT, etc. Com a nota dos anos, again, the years that they entered the synagogue. So this register is from 1728, but you see here a few members who entered this brotherhood at an earlier time. 1659 are the oldest one. And this is because the boards, these panels started in 1728, but they also had the existing members and in the sequence of annuity. I now compare those two lists. To the left is the panel with the names, and to the right is that register with the membership. And one name is missing, namely the one of Ribka, Viva, the Isha Kohen Kaminya. Well, the answer is here. The sisters of this brotherhood had their own panels, and there were two of them. And to the right, to the left above, you see the name Ribka, Viva, the Kohen Kaminya. On the whole, these are mostly families that were well off and were able to give freely and generously. But everyone who could become a member of Ets Haim. And we may assume that membership ended when payments stopped or when people moved or died. We don't know exactly how long people stayed because we only have these two sources of entrance into the membership. There are a few lists of all the members in a certain year, in 1699 and a few other years. In 1716, some 170 male members were mentioned. One from London, 10 from The Hague, the rest from Amsterdam. And then there were some 100 female members as well. And then there's, so you have the panels with the names of the male members, the female members, but there are separate panels for those who left money to Ets Haim or gave a large sum of money during their life. And this goes back to 5397, 1637. And this was the year of the establishment of the Brotherhood of Azkaban. And the Brotherhood of Azkaban was established because it was noted that students ran away from school for lack of means. They could no longer afford to study. So in 1637, the Brotherhood was established to collect the money to support the students who studied in Ets Haim. And if you see those names, most of those names can be traced in the archives of the Portuguese Jewish community at large, or in the registers of Ets Haim itself. There's one name on the board to the left, and it's here. It says Michael de Spinoza. I could nowhere trace the amount of money he gave. I could trace no deed in which he gave that money, and it's a mystery. The rest is all findable, but his, alas, not. Those whose names are on the panel are also in the Registro de Verbos dos Testamentos. So this is a register of last wills in which Ets Haim is mentioned. So all the names on the panels you may also find in this register. Here is an example. It's an abstract of part of the will of Donna Sarah Canet, viuva de Gaga Abraham Cohen de Herrera. And she left 1,000 guilders to Ets Haim. And she had a condition, and the condition was that family members of her through the ages would also always have access to a study in Ets Haim. And those family members were mostly Delgados. And if you gave, there were prayers said for you. And you ended up in the Livro do Azkaban. So it was meant to be perpetuated into eternity, but the Second World War put an end to that. But in here are the names of all those who gave money and the date on which these prayers were to be recited. I will now talk about the heads of the school and the teachers. The heads of the school were these people. They were also Chacham of the community. It sort of came of the job that they were also the Ros, or the head teacher of Ets Haim. Most of them were born in Amsterdam. There was one from Italy, one from Portugal, one from Oran, one from Safed, and one from Adrianople, which is somewhere in Greece or above. The names of the teachers were sampled by someone who had access to the archives, and he made a list of all the teachers of Ets Haim, starting in very early in 1714, although the school was not established until 1616. So maybe he gave private lessons or something like that. And here are, for example, David Pardo, the Chacham, Isaac Aboab, also Chacham, and before the name there's an R. It stands for Ruby, not for rabbi. In Amsterdam, Ruby was a teacher. But of course, afterwards there was all kind of confusion. Rubies were named rabbis and vice versa. Especially after these people are no longer around. Where can we find the names of those teachers? Well, in this list, but all those teachers were also appointed by the Mahamat. So you may find their names in Escamot A, B, and C. And after that, there were separate registers of appointments of everyone. Those who served on the board of the Mahamat and those who served as on the board of Ets Haim and Biker Holem, but also all the salaried people of the community. And I have one example of such an appointment, and this is a bit tragic one. In 1730, David Abrabano had been appointed as Ruby. He succeeded his father on a salary of 300 guilders, supplemented with 150 baskets of peat. Now, 150 baskets is a lot. Individual persons on the poor list received no more than 50, 60 baskets. So I assume that these baskets of peat were also meant for the midrash or for the classroom where David Abrabano was teaching. But he died 3 years later. And he had been appointed in succession of his father, and now his father succeeds him on the same conditions. My feeling about this is that David Abrabano became teacher, but that he took care of his father. And when David died, his father was out an income, so he was forced to go back to school. What did these teachers teach the children? There is a report of a Shabtai Bas, who was the author of the first Jewish bibliography, who visited Amsterdam in 1680. In the first class, pupils learned to read prayers. Second class, reading the Pentateuch. Third, explain the Pentateuch in Spanish and Portuguese. Fourth class, the other Bible books were taught. And in the fifth, they got halacha and grammar. And the sixth class was the class of the chief Chacham, who taught Rashi and Maimonides. And the picture you see is from a similar curriculum from Yeshiva in Hebron and Jerusalem, which was funded by Jacob Pereira. And when he funded this with 46,000 guilders, he published a brochure with the curriculum that was to be taught in Hebron and Jerusalem. And in first class, they learned to read, they learned the alphabet, and they learned Hebrew. Before we go to the students, there's a question about Baruch de Spinoza, and that is, did he study at Ets Haim? His name does appear in the records of Ets Haim, but not as a student. At the young age of 5, his father made him a member of the charity Ets Haim, along with his brother Ishak Espinosa, and you can see the name of Ishak here. Don't know if you can see my cursor. And below that is the name of Bento Espinosa. And next to that it says son of Michael de Espinosa. And Bento is also a son of Michael de Espinosa. His name is crossed out here, and no doubt because he was excommunicated later. There are lists of students of Ets Haim receiving money to pursue their studies. And the first series of those lists run from 1639 to 1652. If Spinoza had joined the school at the age of 13, he would have been mentioned in 1646. But he is not mentioned in that year and not in those that came after. So we may assume that he attended elementary school, but he probably did not study in the rabbinical class. And I say probably because theoretically, if he didn't receive money from Ets Haim, the charity, he could still have studied with money from his parents. But as Michael de Spinoza got older, he got poorer too. So it's not likely that he was able to fund studies for his son at that point in his life. The students, when I began to investigate who had been a student at Ets Haim, I read the relevant literature and came away with the feeling there wasn't much. A few lists here and there, some recent hypotheses about individuals who might or might not have studied at Ets Haim. But now instead, I think that instead of a big hole with just a few highlights, we have a situation of more or less continuous lists with a few holes in it. And the sources for those lists are Thermos A of Ets Haim, and it begins in 1637. The first list of pupils was from 1639, and year after year until 1652, there's a list of Talmidim. But after 1652, there are only sporadic lists to be found. And then it resumes again in 1700. Where did these students come from? From Spain and Portugal, of course. France, for example, Ledesma, De Sola. Italy, De La Bella, De Benedetti, Riccardo. Turkey, think Pizza, Ahubi, Siprut, De Gabai. The rest of the Balkans, Cohen Belefante. And Morocco. And of course, increasingly from the Netherlands itself. There are more lists of students to be found in the Aspakot. And there are 13 of these registers of these Aspakot. They contain monthly payments to students. And if you look at the image, you can see that the first register ended in 1719, and the second register started in 1755. So there's a gap again. This is what it looks like, such a list. It's At the top is the name of the class and the teacher of the class. Below that, the students and the amount of money they received each month. The biggest earners got 16 guilders, which was nice at the time when a skilled worker could earn 5 guilders a week, so 20 guilders a month. Oh, for a student, nice. But those at the bottom received 3 guilders and 10 stuvers per month. So that's not much. And it took a long time to reach the top of the list. Students entered the school at the age of 13, but the age of 13 was not a requirement. You could also enter later, and some people leaving Spain and Portugal at a later date still joined Ets Haim. There's a list of 1825 where all students are named with their ages. And the youngest was 12, most of the others between 13 and 21. And there were some outliers like Shalom Akatan, 57, and Judah Rachamim from Salonika. He was 80 years old, and at that time he had already been studying for 52 years at Ets Haim. So you have to ask, was this a school or was it a means of supporting people who could otherwise not get enough money to live on? He was truly an eternal student. And some of these lists, some of these names on these lists return again and again after generation after generation. There were at least 10 families who provided students and or teachers to Ets Haim for more than 100 years. One example is the family Balsan from Italy, who provided students from around 1700, and of which family Jacob Balsan was still a teacher in 1850. Other members of the family, after studying at Ets Haim, became Chacham in Hamburg and Grand Rabbin in Paris. Members of the Delgado family studied at Ets Haim from 1640 until well in the 18th century. And other families whose history has been long linked to that of Ets Haim were Cohen de Lara, Saroko, Azubi, Sarfati, Cohen Rodriguez, de Sola, de Mesa, Pizza, Cohen Belenfante, etc., etc. This is a detailed list, and I show it because it shows the name Cohen Belenfante. This is one of their first students in Ets Haim in the year 1701, and this one went on to become a teacher at Ets Haim and also a librarian. Where did these students live from? Well, from the charity Ets Haim, a monthly allowance. At the beginning 2 to 5 guilders, but then after that 2 to 24 guilders. And in 1890, somewhere between 10 and 130 guilders. But there were other sources of income. People like Benjamin Musafia, Jacob Pereira, and Abraham Felix Penzo left money per last will, from which students could receive benefits. Jacob Pereira founded the yeshiva that functioned within Ets Haim. And merchants and or their wives stipulated in their will that students present at their funeral would receive 1 or a few guilders for saying prayers at their funeral. So funerals were a source of income for students of Ets Haim. You saw the gap in the Asbakot. The first Asbakot ended in 1719, and the second began in 1755. I discovered on the website of Ets Haim itself a book that was called Account Book of the Sephardic Congregation of Amsterdam, and the description said contains lists of names of various members of the community, but it looks exactly like the first Asbakot that we saw, and indeed at the top it says Rosh Chodesh Nisan repartido no bedras do Señor Chacham Ailion y Abraham Mendes da Costa Tesorero, treasurer. Now this is a continuation of the first Asbakot, and it means that the gap is now reduced to 1730 to 1755. Another source of income might have been publishing of sermons, books, etc. Here's one example. It was written by Ishak de Solas and approved by his rabbi Shalom de Oliveira. It is still available in the library at Haim. Other students had other sources of income. Judah Pizza published books. Hia Cohen de Lara traded with Morocco, mainly in iron. Judah Siprut de Gabai wrote epitaphs, poems, religious texts that he sold. He also produced for the community. And another source of income was if you rose to the top of the class, you had a chance to be able to deliver sermons yourself, and that earned you 15 guilders per sermon. A lot of the literary production of these students ended up in the library of Ets Haim and is still there today. And then here's another source of income. This is the Vestiaria dos Talmidim. There are 2 registers, and the first one is in a bad shape and couldn't be digitized when I requested it, but the second one is. And surprise, this one begins in 1745. And here we find some more names of students. For example, this list from 1745, which corresponds to 5506. And these were students who received money from the Vestiaria to buy clothes. So it was a wise thing to give them money so they could decide themselves what they wished to wear. And they could maybe use it for other things as well. One last source of income. This is Abraham Penzo, or Abraham Felix Penzo, who made the last will in 1706. He left money. No, he left the capital and the capital produced interest each year, and the interest was used to give money to students from the highest class, 10 students, and there were maybe 23, 24 students. So what did Ets Haim do? They circulated the students, and 1 year 10 students would get 1 guilder from this charity, from this fund, and the next year 10 other students. And the nice thing about this, that it covers the years that are missing between the Aspagot and the Vestiaria. So here are also names of students to be found. Well, a question that I get now and then is, what did exams look like and what did diplomas look like? And we don't know. At least before the 19th century, when exams became obligatory. And to go from one class to another, you did an oral exam. You had to spill your knowledge in a talk with your teacher or more teachers, and then you were promoted or not. But what you could get was a letter of recommendation. And this is a letter of recommendation written by Chacham Daniel Cohen de Azevedo for his pupil David de Sola, who applied for a job as Chazan at Bevis Marks in London. Sorry. Where did these students go to after they finished their studies? I had a list from the first Aspagot from 1716, and there were 30 students on that list, and I was able to find 15 persons where they went to, with the help of a few other people. And the first one is a well-known one, Moses Gomez, the Mesquita Chacham in London. Saruko became Chacham in Maarsen. Ishak Saruko became Chacham in Maarsen, and the son Shalom Saruko became Chacham in The Hague. Several became a teacher at Ets Haim, and Joseph Cohen Belenfante became a librarian of Ets Haim. Manasseh Delgado became a teacher. There's Jacob Bassan, Chacham in Hamburg, and Meir Cohen Belenfante became a Chazan in Barbados. One went on to the printer business and booksellers business, and Mendes Solas became Chacham in Curaçao. That's not bad for one class. It is my feeling that the Western Sephardic world was populated with Chachams and Chazans from Amsterdam. I think that maybe as much as 40 to 50% of all the Chazans and Chazans and Chachams in the Western Sephardic world may have come from Amsterdam. But we need to study that some more. The books. Over the years, a number of catalogs of the library can be found in Termos de Talmud Torah in Ets Haim. And if we analyze those lists, they will provide us with insight in the growths and losses of the library. There are inventories from several years up to 1825, providing snapshots of the content of the library. In some years, it's clearly stated which books belong to which classrooms, especially in the early period, like the one in the insert. It mentions Chazan, Joseph the Pharaoh, who also was a teacher, and the books that he had. In the Ets Haim library as it exists today, you might also find catalogs in manuscript form. And this one was done under the treasurer Shalom Henriquez Ferreira. And it's a catalog of the private library of Moses Teixeira de Matos. That's the image that I used for my first slide. Nearing the end now. What we also have is librarians, and this is the first librarian that I could find. It's Joseph Pharaoh, and he is appointed as librarian in 1655, and he has to take care of the books. And in the separate resolution, I also found that he was supposed to pay from his own purse if books were missing. I am curious what Heide Wernicke, who is the librarian of today, will think of that. Here's an example of the stacked knowledge that's available in Ets Haim. And I end with my favorite book. This is the Orden de Oraciones de Mes. And it was handwritten by Eliyahu Maccabeu, who at the time lived in Recife. So he was a writer, and there are more examples of his writing, which is simply beautiful. But take a look at these, what do you call them, David? Sloten is in Dutch.
So I'm not sure what you mean.
Sorry?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Those
things to close the books.
Yeah.
Clasps.
Clasps. Yes. Sorry. If you look at them closely, you will see that they will represent Moses to the left and Aaron to the right. And this is an example of his writing. There's lots more to tell, but there will be questions, I presume.
So thank you. I mean, that was a lot. Can I? There are a lot of questions. Before we get there, can I just ask? I mean, the people who are studying at Ets Haim, are these the smart kids from the slightly less rich families, or is there some selection process, or do we know?
No, we don't know. I suppose they were spotted in school, in elementary school, and maybe were pushed or asked to follow further studies, and they may have been interested themselves, of course. As far as I know, you had to have a basic level of understanding of being able to read and write, to speak Hebrew, and you had to also be able to speak Portuguese, in 1825, one student was removed from school because his understanding of Portuguese was insufficient, according to his teachers.
Quite right.
And probably Spanish was required as well.
A couple of people have commented that in the book saying what different classes studied, the sort of segundo, the second class, had the Ladino written there.
Yes.
That's presumably not the Ladino of the Judeo-Spanish of the Ottoman Empire.
Ladino was the holy tongue. It was the language reserved for holy texts. If they were not in Hebrew, they had to be in Spanish. And at the time, this was called Ladino. Ladino was not spoken in Amsterdam, for example. And I suppose that Ladino was still developing in that period of time.
So it's Spanish text. It's a Spanish language in Hebrew text.
Yeah, it was meant to learn to as a requirement of being able to read, for instance, the Ferrara Bible.
Yeah. Just looking at some of the earlier questions, Florbella is asking if there are lists of medical doctors. I suppose this is a different.
Yes, there are.
Okay, and those are listed in the.
There was a guild of doctors and surgeons and bloodletters, and this guild also admitted Jews, and you may find through the ages several Jewish doctors and surgeons mentioned, and in the beginning these lists also give the names of the city where they promoted.
Thank you.
And the year in which they received their doctorate.
Arnold was asking earlier, before we got to there, whether women studied in Ets Haim.
No.
I'm assuming the answer is not, but did they study anywhere until sort of girls' schools were established?
They did study up to a certain level, maybe at home, maybe with teachers for the poor. Interestingly, Daniel Swerczynski counted all the signatures in another marriage bans in the 17th century.
Yeah.
And the literacy among male Portuguese was 99%, and among Portuguese women, 75%. And I think among the population as a whole, it was maybe 40% for women.
Yeah.
So they must have learned to read and write, but where maybe homeschooling, maybe learning from a brother, or later there were schools for girls also.
Yeah. Judith just comments that the Cappadocia family is in Daniel Deronda by George Eliot, where incidentally, actually, they did the BBC film adaptation at my synagogue, Bevis Marks, and all they had to do was just take the top hat off the rabbi and put a tricorn on, and it was everything was set to go. You mentioned Adrianople, which Ali points out is Edirne in Turkey, and that's actually the hometown. That's the hometown of the Canetti family of Elias Canetti, who won the Nobel Prize. Is also asking if the Slomar Aylon, who was on the list, is the same one who became Haham in London.
Yes, he was kicked out of London and
Yes.
then was well received in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
No, seriously, he got fired in London.
Yeah, there was well, there was various questions.
Yeah, it was a question about his support for Sabbatai V,
Yes.
which may or may not be true.
Yes.
He sure was a Kabbalist.
It's going through. Sorry, going too fast. Some kind comments by people. This is interesting. A question from Bruce. How did the Ets Haim alumni function as a network that worked alongside the Amsterdam and Sephardic commercial interests to offer trustworthy information flows? That's to say, if you have, I mean, I was wondering that, if you have a group of people who all know each other and been studying together, perhaps is this an extra layer perhaps on top of these family networks in terms of group cohesion?
Yes, but there's preciously little preserved.
Yeah.
But there is an example, and it's great. It's about the Sola family. David de Sola, Gazan in London, corresponded with his father, Aaron de Sola, in Amsterdam. There are some articles about it, and it's fascinating reading. And I assume that others also corresponded with their family as they moved up and down. And we know that if there were, if somebody died and there was an inheritance of some consequence, then the family in Barbados or on Jamaica was notified,
Yeah.
and they got their share of the inheritance. So there must have been an enormous correspondence, but the central correspondence were the communities itself. There was a lot of correspondence from London with other communities in the world, and from Amsterdam also, and of course letters from London to Amsterdam, and vice versa. A lot of these have to do with A, finance, B, appointments of Chachams and Chazans and other communities, and what was the other one? Well, I forgot. But there's much more. Oh yeah, about Terra Santa, the support for Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Jamaica corresponded with London about their support to Terra Santa, and they sent the money to London. London sent it to Jerusalem, and there was always letters to accompany the money. And then there are letters in return to say thank you.
Oh, sorry, there's more questions. You said that it was modeled on, or possibly modeled on Dutch sort of Latin schools, or indeed on Portugal. I wonder how the Ashkenazim viewed this, if they just see this as some sort of strange heretical assimilated people, or
there are two reports of Ashkenazic rabbis visiting Amsterdam. I cited one, but there was also an earlier one, and they were both exalted. They wrote in their reports, "I wish every yeshiva in the world would work like this one."
Okay.
Because young people were taught at the level of their capacity, and not staffed with knowledge that they had no use for.
Okay. Bernard comments on using two calendars, but I mean, we still do, so I don't think there's anything particularly difficult with that. Do we have any? So I just look across to YouTube to see if we have any questions there. No, we don't. Some nice messages. If we have no further questions, shall we close proceedings for today?
Okay.
And just to say that next week we welcome Raquel Levy Toledano, who will be talking about Morocco. And the week after that, we shall be returning to Jamaica. And I'd like to thank Ton for being our guest speaker today, and for not just for this, but for generally, it's just opened up so much of the Amsterdam and indeed other archives for the rest of us. And I think some public acknowledgement is deserved. Ton, if you wish to have an after party, we can have an after party in 5 minutes. And thank you very much for everyone who came today, and thank you for your ongoing support, especially our patrons, but also everyone who just turns up on YouTube as well. You make it all worthwhile for us. And just to thank Tom once again, and to wish everybody a good night, or if you're in America, good afternoon.
Thank you, David. Thank you all for watching. Bye-bye.
Bye.